Education, data, equity.
Reluctant project manager.
Gamer, nurse, developer.
Job interview today.
My name is Jack Hanson. I'm the executive director and co-founder of Run on Climate. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my story and then mostly focus on the work that we do at Run on Climate. So a little bit about myself. I just moved back to the Chicago area. I grew up in Evanston, but I've lived in Vermont for the last 12 years. 2 weeks ago, moved back. Really excited to be back. Even more excited now that I know about this. But yeah, I served on the Burlington, Vermont City Council for 2 terms. And as I'll talk about, that's a lot of what inspired me to launch Run on Climate to support local level climate work. Okay, so this is back in 2006. This was probably the first time that I learned about global warming, as it was called then. Maybe others in this room as well, Inconvenient Truth. Yeah, it affected me a lot. And I think it affected a lot of people. And that year, you know, it wasn't long after Hurricane Katrina, but also the documentary itself, I think it won Best Documentary of the Year. And it was kind of a phenomenon at the time that really woke up the American public. And I was in 6th grade at the time and felt super alarmed. And I think there was a lot of focus on the issue at that time. That's me at that time. That's my 6th grade birthday party. But after, you know, a couple years later, it seemed like the media moved on, you know, the general public moved on, people in my life moved on, and people just weren't thinking or talking about it anymore. What really hit me and what really woke me up was actually an Onion article a couple years later. There's the headline, and it hit so hard. It really hit. It was so on the nail. And you can see here it's mentioning like the big, you know, media issues at the time that people were focusing on, which I had forgotten about until I put this together. But if you look at the quote from the climate scientists, it's like, yeah, this actually might still be a thing worth our focus and worth working on, as we've been saying for 20, 30 years. That was my wake-up call of, I can't just hope this somehow disappears and goes away. If I believe in it, I actually have to focus on it and work on it. So that's part of what drew me to go out to Vermont and start at the University of Vermont with an environmental studies degree. And I dove all in on climate activism. Luckily for me, the fossil fuel divestment movement was just launching at that time. So I was able to tap into that. There's me at a protest at UVM Board of Trustees meeting, where we were trying to get them to divest their endowment from fossil fuel companies. Okay, fast forward to my end of my time in school. Being in Vermont, I got to learn about Bernie Sanders, who at that time, nobody knew who the hell he was. And I actually remember coming back on winter break that year and canvassing in Chicago in the streets for Bernie. And it was really cool because nobody I talked to had ever heard of him. But once I explained the bullet points of what he was about, every single person was like, yeah, this is amazing. I'll vote for this guy. And he did, you know, obviously very well here, but didn't quite make it. But that was kind of my first experience working in electoral politics and having the experience of feeling like, okay, here's someone who's within the system, you know, who's working in traditional politics, but is actually fighting for working people and is actually willing to push on climate and willing to challenge fossil fuel companies and other special interests that are, in my opinion, the biggest obstacle for change. That kind of flowed into me working on a state Senate campaign. This guy, Chris Pearson, was in the state house. He was a longtime kind of friend and mentee of Bernie, and he had helped encourage Bernie to run for president. I had the honor of running his campaign. That one was successful. After that, I did 2 years working at the state level in Vermont through VPIRG, advocating for stronger state policy not just on climate, although my most of my time and energy was on climate. I was there for 2 years. This is one of the things we did. We ran a massive summer canvass, and Trump had just been elected, and in Vermont there was tons of energy at that time of holy shit, how did this happen, and we need to respond. And so this summer canvass, we were able to go to pretty much every town in Vermont and knock on doors and raise money and build support for environmental issues at the state level. And then during the rest of the year, I would work. I was in communications, but we would lobby in the legislature to get stronger climate policy. The problem was, there were multiple problems, but we had just elected a governor who had no interest in climate action. And so the legislature wasn't really interested in taking it up because they knew it would get vetoed. So during that 2-year span, I got to see all this energy, all these young people knocking on doors, thousands of Vermonters donating, supporting. We had tons of out-of-state money coming in because with Trump being elected, a lot of funders wanted to support a state like Vermont where they thought progress could happen. All of that, dozens of really smart, dedicated people. At the end of the day, we didn't pass anything meaningful on climate during that 2-year span. And that experience was really what made me pivot into local action, because in my mind, that type of investment of time, money, people, resources would yield results at the local level, undoubtedly. And we don't have time and money to waste. And so this experience is what kind of made me make that pivot in 2018. That kind of culminated in me running for city council as a 24-year-old on a climate platform, which hadn't been done at the local level in Burlington. And a lot of those folks from the other picture who we had been knocking doors together, they volunteered on the campaign. We knocked every single door in the district twice. We broke voter turnout records, and I was elected, and another young climate activist was elected at the same time. I think I have a picture there. And it kind of shifted the dynamics on city council, and we were able to actually move forward and adopt a lot of really strong climate policies in Burlington. And so that kind of proved my theory at the time that local level, you can get more out for the time and energy you put in. You can get results, which ultimately led to us launching Run on Climate. Also, kind of lucky for us, 2019, if you remember, was the global climate strikes with Greta and that whole movement. And so we had been elected in March of 2019, and that happened in the fall. So we were able to use that momentum and energy from the community to pass some really strong policy. So I want to play a short video. This is so after my first term on city council, it was 2021, we had felt like, a small group of us pushing really hard and focusing our energy on Burlington. We had been able to do some really special things, and it made us think, how do we get more of the climate movement to focus on local politics? Because clearly we found something. And then second to that, the folks that have already figured this out and that are already doing it, how do we give them more support? Because what we found is there's a lack of sort of resources and support for this work. Like, for example, in Burlington, city councilors are paid $5,000 a year. So you're working full time and you're doing this incredibly taxing job as, a night job on the side. And then which is already overwhelming on itself. But then if you're trying to be a climate champion on top of that and create new bold policy and push it, it becomes really difficult. So that was why we wanted to launch an organization to provide that support to help folks actually implement a lot of the change that maybe they ran on when they first ran for office. So this was our GoFundMe when we conceived, myself and a couple other organizers in Burlington, when we conceived of the organization. The climate crisis is the most pressing issue of our time.
If we don't act dramatically now, we will live through a period of climate chaos that will sink cities, displace millions, and disrupt the ecosystems and infrastructure we rely on to survive.
When seeing how far we still have to go to get off of fossil fuels, it's easy to throw your hands up and feel like there's nothing you could do that would make a difference.
We felt that way ourselves a few years ago.
And then we decided to do something about it. Over the last 3 years, we've helped build a movement in our community to revitalize local politics through grassroots campaigning and a bold, progressive vision.
Central to this movement has been the need to take dramatic action on the climate crisis.
Now, we're at a pivotal moment where federal dollars are flowing to local governments at a scale that we haven't seen in decades.
This is a huge opportunity.
But we need to recognize that the federal government isn't just going to wave a magic wand and switch all of our buildings to renewable heating, or add solar to every rooftop, or add bike lanes to every street.
This vital work must be done at the local level.
Seeing the tangible change that has happened in our community from local organizing efforts has given us hope.
In just the past 2 years, our coalition
elected 4 first-time candidates, including the youngest woman, first woman of color, and first openly non-binary person to Burlington City Council.
Passed the net zero energy roadmap to get Burlington off of fossil fuels by 2030.
made Burlington the second city in the nation to require landlords to weatherize their rental units.
And passed a ballot item to allow the city to regulate heating systems to switch buildings from natural gas to renewable heating.
We believe so strongly in the power of creating change locally by building relationships and having conversations with neighbors about the moment we're in and how we need to respond.
We want to share this model with communities across the country.
Transforming their communities from the ground up.
And passing policies that are in line with the stark reality of climate science.
Our organization will
1. Identify and recruit climate champions to run for local office.
2. Support them in their campaigns at little to no cost to them.
3. Use these grassroots campaigns to build urgency, awareness, and community-based action around the climate crisis.
And 4. Pass aggressive climate policies that have ripple effects across communities and up to the state and federal level.
We can't afford to wait.
Politics as usual will not solve the climate crisis.
People willing to fight for justice in their communities will.
If you agree, please support us by donating below and sharing this page with your family and friends.
Thank you. Yeah, that was our GoFundMe video. Funny enough, Bernie Sanders' videographer was the one who made that video for us, just on the side. But that was the theory, and that's kind of still how we're operating as an organization three years later. Couple other reasons of why we do this work at the local level and why we focus exclusively there. The majority of greenhouse gas emissions come from cities. Depending what data source you look at, it kind of ranges between 50 and 75%. And I think arguably more important than that, particularly the transportation and the building sector, which are two of the huge ones for emissions, a lot of the regulation is local for transportation and for buildings. So there's huge opportunity to make a dent through local policy. But again, there are these bottlenecks, and there's not that much support, emphasis, resources to invigorate local policy. So we really invest in local leaders. We really support directly local elected officials as our primary kind of customer. It's free, we give them these services for free, but folks who are running for office, who are climate champions, or who are already in office, who are climate champions, is the main people we work with. And then community activists and advocates as well, we collaborate with to push from the outside. So this is, I think, the biggest, just to shout out the work you all do and kind of think about the data opportunity. There's tens of thousands of municipalities. We're an organization of just a few people at this point. I do think we're going to grow a lot, and there's a few other organizations that have cropped up as well that we partner and collaborate with who do this type of work. But we're never going to have the resources to be in all these communities. And the reality is, every community in the US has so far to go on climate. So there's no community where it's like, oh, they're good, they don't need help, they've already got it in the bag. At this point, these are the numbers, right? So for us, where we hone in and where we really focus, our niche is leading edge communities. And the reason for that being that when leading edge communities can pass really cutting edge policies, those are the ones that make headlines. Those are the ones that become models and kind of spur and have the bigger ripple effect to affect change outside of that community. So that's where we focus so far. Our electoral work, these are some of the numbers. And the thing that I'm really proud of with Run Climate with the electoral, we only endorse first-time candidates. We don't endorse incumbents. So we're specifically supporting folks who've never been in public office before, and people who are really climate champions. I think that sets us apart from other orgs where it's basically almost everyone we endorse works full-time in climate in some way or is extremely dedicated to it. And we're starting to see stronger results as we grow. This is just an example of our most recent slate. So these folks all had November elections. And yeah, it was amazing working with them, and 4 of them won. And so the beauty of working with a candidate is once they win, we can immediately bring them into our network and connect them with other local electeds who have the experience, who've actually passed policy, who know how it works. Because when you get elected, you don't really have like an orientation. You're just kind of thrown in, and and a lot of them, again, don't get paid and don't have staff and don't have resources. So they're getting thrown in. So we kind of serve as that resource for them to help them deliver on what they campaigned on. This is a little snapshot of our network. So these are the elected officials we work with. So the 4 that we just elected are now added into this bigger network of 32. LCPN is the local climate policy network, which we run. And myself and our policy director both are former local electeds, but even more powerful than us helping is them helping each other and that network of peer-to-peer support that we facilitate through this. Couple of highlights. Let me see how I'm doing on time. So a couple of highlights of our work and what that looks like on the ground. So this was a candidate. He's a full-time transportation advocate, or was before he got on council. We endorsed and supported him last summer. We really put a lot of resources. When we endorse candidates, it's not just throwing our logo up on a graphic. Like, we really get in there and help them and put a lot of time and energy into helping them win. And when it's a close race, that really pays off and really validates that work. So I circled it at the bottom. This was a situation where 4 people advanced. He got into that 4th slot by 0.04% was the margin. It was 46 votes after the recount. So that's a race where out of 12,000, right? So that's a race where we know definitively that we flipped the outcome of the race. And the beauty of it, again, is the moment he got elected, we're bringing him into this network. We're feeding him, model policies from other cities that we've passed. We're giving him kind of coaching and advice on how to talk about these issues, how to communicate with his colleagues, with the public, and be that climate champion in Boulder. And Boulder's the perfect example of the type of city that we work in where, if you know anything about Boulder, you think of it as, right, this progressive city that it wants to be climate forward. But what they were lacking was someone like Ryan to be that voice in government who was a climate activist to really push them and get them in line with their reputation, get them in line with the population. Ryan's been able to do that. He's been on the council now for a year and a half and has already championed these are a couple headlines from policies where they're leading the state of Colorado and building decarbonization. They also just passed a huge bicycle infrastructure policy on one of their main corridors. Okay, here's another example. We got really involved in Cambridge, Massachusetts early on and worked particularly with the city councilor, Quinton Zondervan, and he was one of the architects of this Green New Deal concept at the local level. So what Cambridge did is they passed a series of policies that the whole thing was a Green New Deal, where they passed what I think are probably the strongest building decarbonization requirements in the country for existing buildings. which is a big deal there because they have a lot of very large buildings, a lot of biotech. Obviously, Harvard, MIT, both have huge campuses, but then there's also a number of biotech facilities and others. So, and buildings are like over 80% of emissions in Cambridge. So they're tackling it. They're forcing these existing buildings to dramatically cut and eventually eliminate emissions. But they're pairing that with basically a jobs guarantee program where any Cambridge resident who wants to work in green jobs, and it doesn't just have to be in the building sector, but anything that reduces emissions in Cambridge, the city will ensure that they have free training as well as eliminate any barriers to access, whether it's transportation, childcare. Basically, if you live in Cambridge and want to go to into the field, the city will make sure that you get trained up and can have job opportunities to work in the field. So it's a beautiful pairing of there's so much work that needs to be done, and the city is mandating all this work to happen, but then also developing the workforce and creating opportunities for good paying jobs for folks. And they're specifically prioritizing people in communities that are socioeconomically disadvantaged in Cambridge. Because as you might imagine with a city like Cambridge, there's enormous wealth, but there's also this huge disparity and there's a lot of folks getting left behind. So this specifically hones in on that. The really exciting thing for me is after working with Quentin for over a year in Cambridge, he actually stepped off the council to move because his wife was working at Princeton. So he had to move to New Jersey. But now that he's off the council, he's actually joined our team full time at Run on Climate. So we're really lucky to have Quentin on the team now. Another huge part of our work and our success has been working with student interns at universities. And if anyone in this room has connections, I really want to get connected to students here in the Chicago area. We mostly were doing it through University of Vermont students. But these internships, it's been such a win-win. I mean, it's giving students an opportunity to do something impactful and make a difference on climate. I remember being a student and learning about these issues and feeling so much despair and feeling like I need to be involved. I need to be actually doing something and making a difference. So giving that opportunity, and a lot of them, what we do is on the policy side, we'll pair these interns up with city councilors. So they get to work directly with a local elected official and provide that elected official with a lot of needed help. So it's truly a win-win. And we have a lot of students are able to get credit or funding through their school. We also have funding available for students that need that to participate. So this is a little bit looking ahead for us. It's cool because I pulled this from a presentation a couple months ago, and we did achieve these high-level goals. The 2024 policy goals, I'm not going to go all the way through it, but basically out of the 28 cities and 3 counties we work in, we identified 8 focal cities, 8 key cities where we felt there was the greatest opportunity and we wanted to spend more time and energy. And for each of those 8, we had a list of policies that we developed with the city councilor or mayor or other elected on the ground. And we made a ton of progress. We didn't literally pass every single policy we wanted, but we got probably 80% of them done, and the others will continue into 25. We're in an exciting time. I think we've been getting a lot more funding and attention recently, so we're going to be able to grow into more cities going forward. And ultimately, if you look further out, the challenge is how do we, because we're on this leading edge, someone's got to go first. How do we get a city off of fossil fuels and show that model? We want to be a part of that at Run on Climate. We want to support that and accelerate that. And from there, once we start seeing a couple cities get there or get essentially there, it's all about spreading it as quickly as possible to other communities. The only other thing I wanted to plug, just from a data perspective, going back to this, our niche of leading edge, there's a huge opportunity there for data. Right now, we've been kind of, I don't want to say guessing, but it's not been data driven, how we choose the cities that we work in, but it could be. And I think we're starting to, sniff around and try to figure that out. But if we could have data on, the population of that city, what percentage of people in that city list climate as their top issue, and target the cities where that's the highest number as one example. There's probably a million other ways to do it, but using data to identify where we actually want to focus our limited resources, I think, is a really valuable leveling up for us as an organization. As well as races, because again, we're trying to choose races where it's a city that can lead on climate, and it's a tight, contested election. And having data to be able to determine that. Obviously, you can't fully determine how competitive a race is, but if there's any data to help us approximate it better, I think that's valuable. Great. Well, that's all I've got. I'll just wrap up and say, feel really lucky to be doing this work. Feel really lucky to be sharing with you. I'm grateful to all the work that you all are doing. I think the way I view Run on Climate, it's just one tiny piece of the broader puzzle and ecosystem of climate action that I think most, if not all of you all, are a part of as well. And ultimately, it's about that broader movement, and it's about each of us finding our role and our niche within that and how we can contribute. And I think collectively, we can solve this issue regardless of what's going on at the federal level. There's so much that we can do at the local level. So thank you all for what you do, and thanks for the opportunity to speak.
First of all, congratulations on everything you've accomplished. My one question is, do you guys have a specific stance on nuclear? I know that's environmentalists kind of go both ways on that now. So I'm just curious if you guys...
Yeah, that's a good question. As an organization, no. I mean, and the interesting thing, so I didn't even mention, we don't necessarily take stances on issues in that way, but what we do and what we've created on our website is we've built these resources where we've tried to identify what we feel are the most impactful local policies that city governments can adopt. Because there's restrictions to what cities can do, obviously, and that varies state by state. But we've compiled on our website about 50 policies that we feel are most cities have the ability to do, and they really do drive down emissions, and they're achievable and passable. And for each one of those, we'll point to the best examples of cities that have done that. And we'll point to resources and, studies and whatever to support that. So as far as nuclear, that's not really a local level policy. Like, cities don't really decide about nuclear for the most part. There may be some local role with zoning and siting, but we haven't to do it. As far as if you want my opinion on it, I mean, I do think it's part of the solution. I think other renewables, geothermal, wind, solar, some of these I prefer, but I think nuclear, given the reality of our grid, can play a role. That's my personal opinion. But it's so nuanced, I could spend 10 minutes further qualifying everything I just said. So, yeah.
I'm curious how you all deal with cities that don't have a strong city council and mayor, like kind of administrator-run cities. Where I live, the city council is pretty good about climate, but there's very little progress that's been made because we just don't have staff at the city who are capable, to be honest. And our city administrator, who is capable, is much more interested in fixing potholes in the streets, which we do need, but
Yeah, so I forgot to repeat the first question. It was about nuclear, if we had a stance about nuclear power. The second question is about, and I kind of need to explain it to give people context, but this concept of strong council or strong mayor, every local government is different. Even within a state, every local municipality is set up differently. And the legal authority is subdivided differently. So some places don't have a mayor, some places don't have a city council. Some do or don't have a city manager. There's all these different types of structures, and it does get confusing. We mostly work with city councilors. We've worked some with mayors. We've worked some with sustainability directors who are on that staff side. They're not elected, but they, work full time for the city to drive these things forward. So as far as your question, I don't think for a city that doesn't have a strong council, it's not necessarily a barrier to us getting involved. If we think there's potential for that city to be a leader on climate, we could find another avenue to get involved, whether it's working with someone inside city government, an organizer. So if you feel like there's opportunity and there's a way we can help, we want to do that for sure. Hopefully that kind of answers your question. It's very complicated, though, the structure of local governments.
Yeah, I'm curious about the strategy to work with getting folks elected as opposed to finding existing legislators and choosing to partner them. I'm just kind of curious, why you went one way or the other on that.
Right. Well, so we do both, and that's intentional. Repeat the question. So the question is, how do you kind of decide between working with someone running for office versus someone already in office, right, in a particular city, and kind of the strategy around that? There's plenty of cities where we do both. What we don't do is we don't endorse incumbents, as I mentioned. And I like that for a lot of reasons, but one is that once someone is in and we're working with them, it's not because they're going to get our electoral support, right? It's not this transactional thing of, if we work with you, then you're going to help me get reelected, right? It's like, no, this is strictly about passing climate policy. Hopefully your success in passing climate policy will help you get reelected, but we're not going to give you money or endorse you. Again, you're here because you want to be here and you want to get this work done with us. As far as choosing candidates, though, it depends on the makeup of the council or the mayor's office. So say a city, maybe they have an amazing city council, but the mayor is not really on board with climate. Well, that would be a good one for us to get involved in a mayoral race and try to flip that. And we might already be working with councilors, and we really understand that barrier because we're engaged in those battles and we see that need. Or it's a city we've never been involved with, but similar to Boulder, how we got involved, it's like, why isn't Boulder doing more? People there clearly want to. It's got the reputation, but you look at the council, there's not that champion who's just all in on climate. They all care about it, but no one's like the leader. So that's an opportunity. So it's a scenario where flipping a seat changes the dynamics, or it's a scenario where adding one leader changes the dynamic, I would say, is where we target.
Yeah. So you mentioned you've worked with, municipalities, the political authorities on several different issues. As in your experience, are there certain let's say something you're pushing for them to pass, or for example, decarbonizing a building, and I don't know everything on that, but my question is so which issues or types of change have you found the easiest or the most successful? And then in your opinion, of course they all have impact, but then which issues do you think have the most impact? And so it's how.
Yeah. So the question is just thinking about, there's so many different policies that you can work on at the local level. So I think the question is, which ones are harder and easier to pass generally, and which ones have the most impact? It's a great question. It's one I think about a lot. I think the building stuff politically tends to be a little bit easier than the transportation stuff. So with building decarbonization, it's a little bit of a niche audience of people that feel impacted by it in a way. So if you're regulating, okay, all new buildings have to be all electric or something, most people are like, okay, cool. Developers care, it affects them, right? And they're a mixed bag on it. Not all of them oppose it, actually. Some of them are already doing it because in many places it's already cheaper anyways. But it's a smaller kind of constituency that cares. Whereas when you get into transportation and you talk about, and transportation is so critical in many cities, that is the leading source of emissions. Our perspective is, how do we get in cities, how do we get people out of cars, and how do we move to the really low carbon transportation, walking, biking, public transit? EVs for sure is part of it, but we believe that it's even more impactful to move cities away from car-based infrastructure. But that is also one of the hardest things to do, because we have a car culture that's been built up over decades, to the point where if you want to remove parking to put in bike infrastructure, there can be a lot of pushback. And we're dealing with that right now in Evanston. There's a meeting as we speak about that. In Burlington, that was extremely difficult. It would take years and tons of debate just to get one bike lane in on one street. So that one stands out to me a lot, is reducing parking in order to get something better, what I would call better.
Yeah.
Do you have any specific examples or nuggets of knowledge or generalizations that you give candidates, not to win, but to pass policies when they actually get the role, maybe from your experience or from the other candidates where they won, they knew how to win a winning campaign, but now you've hit unexpected difficulty learning how the sausage gets made. What has maybe changed your approach since you got started?
Yeah, so the question is around if I can kind of share some of the advice we give to elected officials on to pass policy. Does that sum it up? Yeah, it's complicated and it's very contextual, but I think there's two things that I would say to that. The biggest thing I learned from serving in local office is that the effort to get a policy passed, as complicated and hard as that is, that's just step one. Because then you have to actually get it implemented, right? As a city councilor, you can't implement anything, basically. So there's two phases to everything, especially at the local level, because at the federal level, if something passes, it's basically going to be enacted, because if it doesn't, someone's going to sue. But at the local level, that's not true. If the city's not enforcing an ordinance, it's probably not going to go to court. So it takes political pressure, and it takes working with staff and crafting good policy to even get it to actually be implemented and enforced. So that's one piece that I would say. And to that point, and also just in general, it's really all about relationship building, I would say. So relationship building with staff that's going to have to implement, because they can either be the biggest barrier or they can be the biggest ally in a policy passing and being implemented. Building relationship with the other counselors, building coalition with different community groups, whether that's climate activists, whether that's public safety groups, economic justice, housing groups, racial justice, like trying to build coalition and work on policies that are addressing several issues at once, which they often are, and building that political will and doing community organizing. So if I could distill it to one word, it would be relationships and organizing.
Yeah.
I heard a couple of different things from you. I heard you support initial candidates for office and work with them. And then I heard you don't support them as incumbents to get reelected. And then later on, when you talked about the future plans, you talked about expanding based on your network. And I'm wondering how that plays, because, I know politicians and they're interested in talking to you if you're going to help them get reelected, but not necessarily if you're just about them, enacting some other policy.
Great. Yeah. So the question is about this piece about us not endorsing incumbents. We're working with these politicians, but we're not then supporting them for reelection. Is it just about kind of the challenge of that and how we navigate that?
Yeah.
So again, basically everyone we work with is all in on climate. they're like me, they're like probably many people in this room. That is their mission in life, is to address the climate crisis. That's who we intentionally select for. And so they're motivated, they ran for office for that reason, as they're, among other things, but usually that's why they even got into politics. So it hasn't been, for that reason, it hasn't been too much of a challenge, because we're here to help them do what they already want to do, and we're giving them that help for free. So even though we're sure they would probably like it if we also helped them get reelected, but I think they're still happy even, without that. And was there another part to your question, or did that answer it?
Well, I saw you had a +4 on, it looked like Illinois.
Yeah.
And where did you get those council members in?
So right now we're in Evanston, Highland Park, and Oak Park. We did endorse a candidate in Chicago in 23, but he lost. So we don't right now have a partnering elected official in Chicago. Yeah, but we're looking to expand for sure.
So you said you guys identify leading edge cities that are kind of like really just need a little bit of a push over the edge.
Mm-hmm.
Where does that search start? Like, how do you guys kind of like look at that? What are some key kind of indicators that you're like, all right, this is the city we need to attack and is ready for change?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the question goes to, how do you identify leading edge cities? How do you find them and select them? Again, I want better data, and we're trying to get better data on that to inform that. So far, we've more been going off of looking at what that city has done already, right? So if a city adopted a climate action plan in 2005 and has already passed, 10 policies within that plan and has this trajectory and has already flatlined emissions, there you go. So a lot of it is just what have they done to date, and kind of what's the current makeup of city government. And again, it might be one seat short. Like you might see that votes are failing by one, then it's maybe an electoral situation or both. So yeah, we mostly go off of what the city's done and what they're currently doing. But I want to bring in way better data to also help decide. Yeah.
Quick, where would you rate Chicago? Like how far are we from anything meaningful?
Yeah, so here's the thing that I didn't mention, but you might have noticed. So far, we haven't done huge cities. I think our biggest cities are Denver and Minneapolis, which are still quite a bit smaller than Chicago. So I think as we're growing, it'll be easier for us to play in some of these bigger cities, but it is a little intimidating at the size we are now. But Chicago's doing, I have to caveat it because I think no city is even close to where they need to be on climate in the US. There are examples outside the US, but in the US, like no one's even close. And I know this because I'm in the leading edge cities. But Chicago comparatively, I think is doing well. I think Chicago's pretty advanced when it comes to public transportation. Again, comparatively to other large US cities. Which is a low bar, but comparatively, both on the transportation and building front, I think Chicago has made a good amount of progress. Great.
Yeah, have you considered cities that sort of are on the opposite end of the spectrum, like cities that have, no climate action whatsoever, like maybe they have a high presence of climate denialists or just people not taking action? Like, how do you target those kind of cities?
Right. I don't know if I repeated the last question. It was, where is Chicago? Where does Chicago stand in all this? Then this question is about, would you ever work at the other end of the scale of a city that's basically done nothing on climate? Not yet. We're still in this niche right now, because even within this niche, we don't have the capacity to do what we want to do. But I think as we really grow and expand, and then in partnerships with other groups, ultimately, again, it's this collective thing. We got to get every single city there eventually. So that's kind of the big picture, long-term goal. But for us right now, as one organization and a small one, it's leading edge.
What services do you provide the candidates other than helping them get elected? Like, how do you support them after, other than connecting them to the network? Is there certain things your organization does specifically?
Yeah. So the question is about candidates that we support after they win, or
like what what do you do to support them other than just put them in the network?
Yeah.
Because that's what you said when you played the GoFundMe, was that you wanted to support them because they are really busy. And I'm just wondering,
Yeah.
like, what is that support?
Thank you for that question. Yeah, so the question is, how do we actually support local politicians in getting policy passed? And I'm really glad you asked that. It can look a little different every time, but I'll just tell a quick story from when I was on city council that helped inspire this and get me thinking about it. I championed a proposal for ranked choice voting, which is, if people don't know, it's a different voting system where you get to actually rank the candidates. And if your preferred candidate loses, your vote can get transferred to your next preferred candidate, et cetera. When I was working on this national organization called Fair Vote reached out to me and said, hey, we see that you've proposed this. We saw a news story. We want to help you. We want to help you get this passed. And I was like, sure, let's get on the phone. And they gave me all these one-pagers, all these resources. They said, what are you hearing in opposition? What are other councilors saying who aren't on board? Because I was making the calls to my colleagues trying to get the votes. And I'm hearing all these things. Oh, I don't know, it's too expensive or this or that. What are you hearing? I'm going to send you a one-pager for every counter-argument you're hearing that addresses that counter-argument directly, and give you the tools you need to make the case to your colleagues and to the public that this is worth doing. Also, I'm going to use politics. So like at that time, the Democrats, I was a progressive, which is the third party in Vermont, but the Democrats controlled the council. So this person said, how do we influence Democrats politically? He's like, Howard Dean, the former governor of Vermont, supports ranked choice voting. I'm going to get him to do a sign-on letter with other Democrats at the state level. So they're going to get pressure from their own party. So there was this whole press release and public thing of like high-ranking Democrats in Vermont telling the Burlington councilors to do this. So basically, it can look different for every policy, but the idea is, how are we going to get the votes, and what do we need to get the votes? Is it turning out 50 people to a meeting to speak in favor? Is it getting a high-profile person? Is it just having the right arguments and the right one-pagers? That's kind of the work. Yeah.
Is that most of the work, or is it the election?
The policy work. So the question is, how does it compare to the electoral work? Our primary focus is the policy passage work with elected officials, and the elections work is secondary to that. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much.